April 15th, 1943. 20,000 feet over the frigid, unforgiving coast of occupied France. Inside the cockpit of his new Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, Major Donald Blakesley's leather glove tightened on the control stick, his knuckles white. Below, a lone silhouette broke through the clouds, the sleek, deadly shape of a Focke-Wulf 190. For weeks, Blakesley and the men of the 4th Fighter Group had endured the mockery of their British allies, who derisively called their new fighter a 7-ton milk bottle. It was a monster, impossibly heavy and brutally oversized compared to the elegant Spitfires and Messerschmitts that danced in these skies. By every known rule of aerial combat, it shouldn't have been able to fight, but the Germans of Jagdgeschwader 26 were about to learn that America had not sent a duelist, it had sent executioner. Blakesley centered the German fighter in his gun sight. The enemy pilot, a confident ace in the pride of the Luftwaffe, had no idea he was flying into a statistical impossibility. At 300 yards, Blakesley pressed the firing button. It was not the familiar chatter of 2 or 4 guns he unleashed, but the apocalyptic roar of 8 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns erupting at once, a concentrated stream of 6.400 rounds per minute. The Focke-Wulf did not go down in a trail of smoke. It simply ceased to exist, disintegrating into a cloud of shrapnel under the sheer weight of American firepower. This was more than the P-47's first aerial victory. It was a declaration of war from the factories of an industrial giant, a brutal announcement that the very mathematics of air combat had been violently and irrevocably changed. That singular violent event over the French coast was not an end, but a thunderous beginning. The flash of Blakesley's victory was the first strike of a storm that had been gathering for years. A storm born not in the wind tunnels of aeronautical science, but in the fire-belching furnaces and sprawling factory floors of a nation, awakening to total war. To understand the terror and awe the P-47 Thunderbolt inspired, one must first understand the world it was designed to break. European air combat, until that moment, had been a lethal art form, a brutal ballet danced by thoroughbreds. The German Luftwaffe masters of this deadly craft had perfected a philosophy of combat built on the principles of efficiency, elegance, and the surgical kill. Their premier fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW-190, were the instruments of this philosophy. They were the duelists, rapier-light, agile, and designed to deliver a single fatal thrust. Every component of a German fighter was an exercise in obsessive, weight-saving, and refined performance. Engineers would agonize over grams, shaving slivers of metal from structural members to grant their pilots a fractional advantage in a climb or a turn. Their armament reflected this precision. A typical FW-190 carried a sophisticated mix of rifle-caliber machine guns and powerful 20mm cannons. The cannons were the kill weapon, firing explosive shells that could tear the wing off a Spitfire with a handful of well-aimed hits, but they carried limited ammunition. A German ace was not a brawler. He was a hunter, a marksman who stalked his prey, calculated the angle of deflection, and fired in short, disciplined bursts. Waste was anathema. The entire system, from the pilot's training to the aircraft's design, was geared towards conserving ammunition and achieving a kill with maximum efficiency. This was the proven formula for victory, the doctrine that had conquered the skies over Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. It was a philosophy of quality over quantity, of the skilled warrior over the faceless legion. Into this world of surgical precision, America hurled a sledgehammer. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the physical manifestation of a completely alien philosophy, one conceived not by aristocratic duelists, but by a Georgian immigrant named Alexander Kartveli. Kartveli, Republic Aviation's chief designer, did not see the air war as a series of chivalrous jousts. He saw it as a problem of industrial attrition, a grim equation where survival and destructive output were the only variables that mattered. When European engineers saw an aircraft, they saw a delicate balance of speed, maneuverability, and firepower. When Kartveli looked at the sky over Europe, he saw a problem that could not be solved by finesse. It had to be solved by brute force. His guiding principle was terrifying in its simplicity, overwhelming firepower at any cost. This philosophy began with the heart of the beast, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. It was not merely an engine, it was a 2,000 horsepower furnace, a monolithic source of raw power that dwarfed anything the Germans were putting in their single-engine fighters. This engine was the great enabler, the foundation upon which Kartvel's brutal vision could be built. Because he had this colossal power plant, he was freed from the constraints that so obsessed his European counterparts. Weight was no longer an enemy to be vanquished. It was a resource to be used. And he used it. He bolted on armor plate around the cockpit, layered self-sealing fuel tanks, and built the airframe with a ruggedness that bordered on agricultural. The P-47 was not designed to dodge bullets. It was designed to absorb them and keep flying. But the engine's greatest gift was its ability to carry an arsenal that defied all European logic. Kartveli didn't give the P-47 a balanced mix of weapons. He gave it a battery, 8 Browning M2, 50 caliber machine guns, 4 nestled in each wing. To a German designer, this was madness. Heavy machine guns lacked the explosive punch of a cannon shell. Mounting 8 of them added immense weight and complexity. It was inefficient. It was crude. It was, from their perspective, the epitome of unsophisticated American thinking. They were catastrophically wrong. They had fundamentally misunderstood the American philosophy. The 8 guns of the Thunderbolt were not meant for surgical sniping. They were designed to function as a single weapon system, an aerial shotgun. The pilot didn't need to be a perfect marksman. His job was to place the enemy aircraft anywhere within his gun sight and hold down the trigger. In that instant, he would unleash a solid wall of lead, a converged stream of armor-piercing incendiary projectiles traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The sheer volume of fire created a kill zone in the air, a space approximately 10 feet in diameter, where anything that entered was shredded. It didn't matter if the German pilot was a 100-kill ace. He couldn't dodge physics. He couldn't outfly a cloud of steel. This philosophical clash was a scene of brutal disillusionment played out time and again in the skies over the Reich. Imagine a Luftwaffe pilot supremely confident in his skill and his 4 FW-190. He spots a lone Thunderbolt, lumbering and fat, a perfect target. He closes in, lining up the perfect shot for his cannons. He fires a short, precise burst, expecting the American plane to blossom into flame. But it doesn't. The P-47 shudders, pieces of its skin might fly off, but the monstrous R-2800 engine keeps pulling, and the 7-ton airframe keeps flying. The German pilot confused circles around for another pass. But now the milk bottle turns towards him. It does not try to outmaneuver him in an elegant dance. It simply points its nose at him. Suddenly the air in front of the American fighter ignites. 8 streams of tracers every 5th round, a glowing ball of light, reach out, not like individual bullets, but like solid beams of energy. The German pilot is no longer in a dogfight. He is facing a firing squad. He is not fighting a pilot. He is fighting a factory. A nation so rich and powerful, it could afford to solve a tactical problem by hurling an impossible amount of metal across the sky. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more than a fighter. It was a fist with wings, a flying battering ram built to smash its way through the refined, elegant, and ultimately fragile doctrines of European air power. It was the loud, terrifying, and undeniable answer to a question the Luftwaffe hadn't even known to ask. The German ace, who survived his first encounter with a P-47 Thunderbolt, did not fly back to his airfield with a story of a simple dogfight. He returned with a chilling premonition, a tale of something fundamentally wrong with the universe he had known. The individual plane, as terrifying as it was only the tip of a spear whose shaft stretched 4,000 miles across an ocean to a continent untouched by war. The true horror was not what that one pilot did in the sky. It was the dawning realization of what that one plane represented. The Luftwaffe's most dangerous enemy was not Major Donald Blakesley. It was a sprawling, smoke-belching factory complex on a place called Long Island, New York. It was the Republic Aviation Corporation. For every Fokker-Wulf that was painstakingly handcrafted by skilled artisans in a dispersed, frequently bombed German workshop, a river of steel and aluminum flowed without end from the gates of Republic's Farmingdale plant. By the time of Blakesley's victory in April 1943, this single facility was completing 1 P-47 Thunderbolt every 4 hours. It was a rate of production that defied comprehension, a feat of industrial organization that treated the creation of a complex 7-ton fighting machine with the same relentless efficiency as a bottling plant. The German High Command could read the production reports, but they could not truly grasp the reality. They could not envision the miles of assembly lines, the specialized machine tools, the tens of thousands of workers moving in a synchronized 24-hour ballet of construction. While Germany struggled to build 1,000 fighters of all types in a month, America was preparing to bury them under an avalanche of a single model. And what fed this beast? What gave life to its 8 roaring guns? The answer lay in another corner of America's unassailable heartland at a place called the Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri. This was not merely a factory. It was an industrial ecosystem dedicated to a single purpose, feeding the Browning M2 machine gun. The numbers that came out of Lake City were not statistics. They were an apocalypse in waiting. By 1943, this one plant was producing 1.6 billion rounds of 50 caliber ammunition annually. This figure is so vast it becomes meaningless until placed in its horrifying context. That single American factory, operating in complete safety, outproduced the entire small arms and aircraft ammunition industry of the Third Reich. Combined, a German fighter squadron might enter combat with a few thousand rounds of mixed-caliber ammunition for all its planes. A single American P-47 squadron of 16 aircraft took off carrying 44800 rounds with literal millions more waiting in stockpiles at their airfield. The German pilot counted every shot. The American pilot was trained to fire liberally, to walk his rudder pedals and spray the target, confident in the knowledge that behind every bullet he fired, there were a million more just like it. This quantitative superiority was underpinned by a qualitative advantage the Germans, with their craft-based methods, could never match true standardization. A German MG 151 cannon was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was often assembled by a single master craftsman. Its parts were hand-fitted, filed down by fractions of a millimeter to achieve a perfect fit. If it broke in the field, it often required another specialist to repair it. The Browning M2, a design from 1933, was a masterpiece of a different kind, a masterpiece of producibility. It was designed from the outset to be manufactured by semi-skilled workers on automated machinery. Its components were made to such precise tolerances that they were completely interchangeable. A ground crewman in the mud of an English airfield could take a barrel from one damaged gun, a receiver from another, and a bolt from a third, slap them together and have a perfectly functioning weapon. This level of standardization was a logistical miracle that German industry, for all its technical brilliance, could not achieve. It meant American serviceability rates stayed consistently above 85%, while Luftwaffe units were lucky to get 50% of their aircraft in the air, with the rest being cannibalized for spare parts. The ultimate difference lay in the very soul of their industrial systems. German production relied on a dwindling pool of master craftsmen supplemented by an increasingly resentful and sabotage-prone workforce of slave laborers. Their factories were scattered, hidden, and constantly under attack. Their resources were finite, their fuel synthetic and inconsistent. The American system was the polar opposite. The workforce at Republic and Lake City was made up of well-paid American citizens, a huge percentage of them women, the legendary Rosie the Riveters, who took immense pride in their work. They operated in climate-controlled facilities, guided by principles of statistical quality control that rejected any component varying by more than 1/1000th of an inch. Their raw materials were boundless, their supply lines secure. The result was a weapon system of staggering reliability, born from a system of staggering capacity. So when that German pilot looked at the P-47, he wasn't just seeing an enemy fighter. He was seeing the embodiment of this entire system. The engine's roar was the sound of the Pratt & Whitney factory. The invulnerable airframe was a product of Alcoa's aluminum production, and the terrifying streams of tracers from its 8 guns were a direct line back to the women in Missouri inspecting billions of perfect gleaming brass cartridges. He was not outflown, he was outproduced, outsupplied, and outsystematized. His individual skill, his era, and his Ritterkreuz were rendered tragically irrelevant by an industrial behemoth that had redefined the very meaning of war. The brute force of the American factory, an abstract concept of steel and statistics, did not remain an ocean away. It was delivered daily into the skies over Europe, and its arrival was not subtle. It came in the form of wings and thunder, and it fundamentally broke the art of war as the Luftwaffe knew it. Before the Thunderbolt arrived in overwhelming numbers, the German fighter pilot was the undisputed master of his domain. He was an aristocrat of the air, a hunter who operated on a set of lethal, proven principles. His Bible was the tactical playbook of the Jagdflieger, a doctrine perfected over years of combat. The classic attack was a masterpiece of geometry and violence. The high-speed dive from above and behind the boom and zoom allowed him to strike with the advantage of speed and altitude, firing a short, precise burst from his cannons, before climbing back into the sun untouchable. Against the vulnerable formations of B-17 seconds, the head-on pass was another favoured tactic, a terrifying game of chicken where the German pilot's 20mm cannons could shred a bomber's cockpit in the blink of an eye. They dictated the terms of every engagement. They chose when and where to fight, striking with the deadly efficiency their entire system was built upon. Then came the P-47 seconds. At first, they were just another target, big and clumsy. But as their numbers grew, a horrifying new reality began to dawn on the German aces. Their entire tactical Bible was being rendered obsolete chapter by bloody chapter. The head-on pass, once a demonstration of supreme skill and courage, became an act of mechanized suicide. A German pilot diving towards a bomber formation now found himself flying not at a single bomber, but into the converged fire of an entire squadron of Thunderbolts. He was aiming his two cannons at a target that was aiming 32, 50 caliber machine guns back at him. It was no longer a duel. It was a man with a rifle charging a fortified machine gun nest. The air in front of the American fighters became a solid wall of lead and tracers, an impenetrable barrier that shredded anything that dared to enter it. The tactic was abandoned almost overnight, not by command, but by the simple, brutal instinct of survival. Attacking from the rear, the cornerstone of classic dogfighting, proved just as futile, but in a more frustrating, soul-crushing way. A Fokker-Wulf pilot could position himself perfectly close to point-blank range and pour his entire ammunition load of cannon shells into the fuselage and wings of a P-47. By all rights, the American plane should have disintegrated. But it didn't. The Thunderbolt would shudder violently, shedding pieces of its skin. Its control surfaces might be damaged, but its rugged airframe and monstrous engine would absorb the punishment. The German pilot, his cannons now empty, would watch in disbelief as the crippled giant he had just killed simply continued to fly, or worse, turned its own still fully loaded arsenal back on him. The psychological impact was devastating. It was like fighting a golem, a creature impervious to blows that would have felled any other opponent. It eroded the German pilots' confidence in their machines, in their marksmanship, and in the very rules of combat they had always trusted. Even the vertical fight, the domain of the energy fighter, was stolen from them. The P-47's greatest tactical advantage, a direct result of its immense weight, was its incredible dive speed. It fell out of the sky like a thrown anvil. A German pilot engaged with a Thunderbolt above him faced an impossible choice. If he tried to turn and fight, he would be forced into a defensive battle against a plane that could outshoot and outlast him. If he tried to escape by diving away, the classic escape maneuver, he would find to his horror that the 7-ton milk bottle was not only keeping up, but was gaining on him its 8 guns ready to open fire. The P-47 took ownership of the third dimension. American pilots, led by tacticians like Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group, learned to use this advantage with ruthless effect. They would stay high, refusing to be baited into low-speed turning fights, where the FW-190 had an edge, and would instead dictate the battle with devastating high-speed passes from above, knowing their enemy had no escape. But the true genius of the P-47, the tactical shift that no one had designed or predicted, came after its primary mission was complete. Once the bombers had hit their targets and turned for home, the Thunderbolt pilots were let off the leash. With thousands of rounds of ammunition and hours of fuel remaining, they were free to hunt on their own, and they descended. They brought the industrial might of America down from the stratosphere and unleashed it upon the German army itself. The P-47, the high-altitude escort fighter, became the most feared ground attack aircraft of the war, the dreaded Jabo or Jagdbomber. The transformation was terrifying to behold. A flight of P-47 seconds, their escort duty done, would peel off and dive towards the French or German countryside. The first sign of their arrival for the soldiers below was a sound, a high-pitched, banshee-like shriek that grew in intensity. It was the sound of air rushing through the Thunderbolt's gun ports and over its massive engine cowling, a sound that became a psychological weapon in its own right, a herald of imminent, inescapable death. Then came the tracers. A pilot would spot a German supply train snaking through a valley. He would roll his juggernaut over, point its nose down, and press the trigger. A 10-second burst would walk a curtain of fire 100 yards long across the entire train. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the locomotive's boiler, causing it to explode in a catastrophic cloud of steam and shrapnel. Boxcars were ripped open, their contents set ablaze. Fuel trucks, armoured cars, staff cars, supply columns, anything that moved on a road was a target. Nothing could withstand the sheer destructive energy. A single pass from a squadron of P-47 seconds could reduce an entire armoured column to a line of burning wreckage. This new role was a strategic catastrophe for the German war machine. The P-47 wasn't just shooting down its planes, it was severing its logistical arteries. It systematically destroyed the transportation network that supplied the front lines. German commanders could no longer move troops or supplies by rail during daylight hours without risking complete annihilation from the sky. The Thunderbolt had changed the very condition of the battlefield. It had created a new kind of warfare where American air power was not just a force to be fought in the sky, but a constant predatory presence that held the entire enemy ground force hostage. The P-47 had not just ripped up the Luftwaffe's tactical playbook, it had descended from the heavens to burn Germany's entire war plan to the ground. The shrieking dive of the Jabot as it eviscerated a German supply column was more than just a tactical event. It was the final brutal expression of a vast and complex organism, a system of human and material superiority so profound that it operated on a different plane of reality from its German adversary. The Thunderbolt itself, a machine of incredible resilience and firepower, was merely the fist. The true weapon was the arm that swung it, an arm forged in the training fields of Arizona, powered by the logistical genius of an entire nation, and guided by a philosophy that treated war not as a contest of skill, but as an industrial process to be won through overwhelming systematic output. The machine was terrifying, but the system behind it was invincible. This clash of systems began with the man in the cockpit. The American pilot who climbed into his P-47 England was the end product of the most extensive and resource-rich training pipeline the world had ever seen. Before he ever saw a Focke-Wulf in his gun sight, he had already accumulated over 400 hours of flight time. He had been through primary basic and advanced flight schools, a standardized factory-like process designed to produce not just pilots, but proficient aerial combatants. He had spent dozens of hours practicing gunnery, firing thousands of live rounds at towed targets, until the act of leading a moving target became muscle memory. He knew the quirks of his R-2800 engine, the feel of his 7-ton fighter in a dive, and the awesome power of his 8 guns, not from theory, but from exhaustive, repetitive practice. He arrived in the European theatre of operations, a highly trained professional, comfortable in his machine and confident in his abilities. But the true genius of the American system was not just in how it created its warriors, but in how it preserved them. The American pilot flew a tour of duty, initially 25, later extended to 35 or 50 missions. If he survived, he was not rewarded with more combat until he was killed. He was rotated home. This was not an act of benevolence. It was a coldly brilliant strategic calculation. This combat-hardened veteran who had looked death in the face and learned its lessons now became the instructor for the next generation of pilots. He brought the raw, immediate realities of the air war over Germany back to the training fields, refining tactics, sharing life-saving knowledge, and ensuring that the pilots who replaced him were even better prepared than he had been. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of excellence, an industrial-scale system for harvesting, refining, and reinvesting the priceless commodity of combat experience. Contrast this with the tragic trajectory of the German expert. In the early years of the war, he was a legend, a knight of the sky with hundreds of victories. But he was a finite, irreplaceable resource. By 1943, the Luftwaffe's training program was in a state of collapse, starved by catastrophic fuel shortages. A new German pilot was lucky to have 110 flight hours before being thrust into the inferno. He learned his trade not over the calm deserts of Arizona, but in the deadly skies over the Reich, where his first mistake was almost certainly his last. And for the aces who survived, there was no tour of duty. There was no rotation home. Their mission was to fly and fight until they were shot down, captured, or physically broke down. The Luftwaffe was forced to burn its seed corn, keeping its dwindling number of experts on the front lines until the very end. The result was a widening chasm of skill. On one side, a constantly refreshed pool of well-trained, confident American veterans. On the other, a handful of exhausted, overburdened German aces flying alongside terrified novices who were little more than targets. This human disparity was mirrored and magnified by the logistical systems that supported them. An American fighter base in England was a microcosm of the United States itself, a place of overwhelming abundance. A crew chief had at his disposal a seemingly infinite supply of resources. In vast hangars and warehouses, one could find complete replacement engines sealed in crates, stacks of propellers, rows of spare gun sets, and pallets loaded with every conceivable component from landing gear struts to canopy glass. Maintenance was not a desperate scramble. It was a highly organized professional operation. A P-47 could return from a mission looking like a piece of Swiss cheese riddled with over 200 bullet and cannon shell holes. To the Germans, such an aircraft would be a write-off fit only for cannibalization. At the American base, a swarm of specialists would descend upon it. The damaged engine could be swapped out for a brand new one overnight. A shredded wing could be unbolted and replaced in a day. The American system did not view the aircraft as a precious handcrafted artifact. It was a tool, a replaceable part in the larger machine of war, and the system was designed to keep those tools in the fight at all costs. The German airfield by late 1944 was a portrait of logistical starvation. The crew chief was a master of improvisation, forced to perform miracles with nothing. The primary source of spare parts was the wreckage of other aircraft. Cannibalization was not a last resort. It was standard operating procedure. The most critical shortage was fuel. The inconsistent low-octane synthetic fuel from Germany's beleaguered coal to oil plants was rationed with excruciating care. A pilot might be allocated only 30 or 50 gallons for a sortie, barely enough to take off, engage briefly, and pray he had enough to get home. This fuel anxiety dictated every tactical decision. German pilots could not afford the aggressive fuel-guzzling maneuvers that won dogfights. They flew with one eye on their gun sight and the other on their fuel gauge, a fatal handicap when facing an enemy who flew with full tanks and no such anxieties. Ultimately, the P-47 Thunderbolt, for all its individual prowess, was merely the most visible part of this superior organism. A Focke-Wulf 190 was on paper a magnificent fighting machine, perhaps even a better pure dogfighter in certain situations. But a Focke-Wulf sitting on a muddy field with an empty fuel tank flown by a terrified one, 8-year-old with 110 hours of flight time, and supported by a ground crew that had to steal parts from a wreck to keep it flying, was not a weapon. It was a tragedy. The American system ensured that its fist, the P-47, was always ready to strike with maximum force. It put a veteran in the cockpit, filled the wings with fuel, loaded the guns with an endless supply of ammunition, and guaranteed that if the plane was damaged, another one was ready to take its place. The war in the skies over Europe was not won by a better aircraft. It was won by a better system. It was a victory of the assembly line over the craftsman's workshop, of the standardized training pipeline over the isolated master, and of logistical abundance over desperate scarcity. It was the total crushing victory of a new way of war. The total victory of the American system, a victory of the assembly line, the training pipeline, and the logistical network, was not a conclusion written in the history books and then forgotten. It was a seismic event that left a permanent, indelible scar on the landscape of modern warfare. The P-47 Thunderbolt did not simply retire from the field of battle as a successful weapon. It ascended into the realm of legend, not for the battles it won, but for the brutal, undeniable truth it taught the world. Its legacy is not just one of statistics and kill ratios. It is a fundamental doctrine, a new gospel of war written in fire and steel, a philosophy that dictates the shape of conflict to this very day. First, one must fully comprehend the strategic magnitude of its contribution. The Thunderbolt was the great shield of the 8th Air Force during its darkest, most desperate hours. Before the long-legged P-51 Mustang could ride to glory, it was the P-47 that held the line. Throughout the bloody campaigns of 1943 and early 1944, on missions to heavily defended targets like Schweinfurt and Regensburg, it was the jugs that formed the protective envelope around the bombers, as far as their fuel would take them. They were the battering ram that smashed into the wall of German fighters engaging in ferocious, swirling dogfights that blunted the Luftwaffe's initial most savage attacks. They absorbed horrendous punishment and inflicted devastating losses, buying with their own blood the critical time and space the bomber offensive needed to survive and grow. The 56th Fighter Group, flying only P-47 seconds, became the top-scoring American fighter group in Europe, a testament to the fact that in the right hands, the Thunderbolt was a peerless killer. The final tally in Europe is staggering. P-47 seconds were credited with destroying over 7,000 enemy aircraft, both in the air and on the ground. They broke the back of the Luftwaffe's defensive fighter force, creating the conditions for the air supremacy that would make D-Day possible. But this was only half the story. The P-47's strategic masterstroke was its transformation into the undisputed king of ground attack. In this role, it did not just contribute to victory. It actively dismantled the German war machine piece by agonizing peace. The statistics read like a logistical apocalypse. 9,000 locomotives destroyed 8,600 railway cars, annihilated 6,800 motor vehicles, and 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, reduced to burning scrap. These are not just numbers. Each destroyed locomotive was a stalled panzer division. Each strafed supply column was a starving infantry unit. Each obliterated fuel truck was a grounded squadron of Messerschmitts. The P-47 systematically severed the Wehrmacht's logistical spine, paralyzing its ability to move, to resupply, and to react. The shrieking sound of its dive became the anthem of German defeat on the Western Front, a constant, terrifying reminder that nowhere was safe. It achieved a level of battlefield dominance that transcended the air war and directly impacted the ground war in a way no other fighter had before. From this brutal twofold success, a new doctrine was born, a legacy that would echo far beyond the Second World War. The P-47 Thunderbolt forever killed the romantic notion of war as a contest of chivalrous aces and elegant machines. It replaced it with the cold, hard reality of war as an industrial process. The legacy of the P-47 is the doctrine of overwhelming industrial firepower. It is the principle that tactical finesse and individual skill, while valuable, are ultimately subordinate to the ability to deliver a massive, sustained, and technologically superior volume of destruction upon an enemy. The Germans, with their Fokker-Wulfs, brought a rapier to the fight. America, with the P-47, brought a power-driven trip hammer. The doctrine taught that you do not need to be a better shot if you can fire 10 times more bullets. You do not need to be more maneuverable if you can absorb the enemy's best blows and still have the power to obliterate him in return. This philosophy inverted the classic military equation. It posited that industrial might was not merely a support function for tactical excellence. Industrial might was the decisive tactical advantage. The ability to produce, supply, and deploy an endless stream of rugged, heavily armed platforms, crewed by well-trained personnel, became the new definition of victory. This lesson was not lost. It became the bedrock of American and Western military thinking for the next century. Look at the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the modern spiritual successor to the P-47. It is not a graceful dogfighter. It is a flying tank built around a gargantuan rotary cannon, designed to absorb punishment and deliver a volume of fire that is nothing less than the direct descendant of the P-47's 8 Brownings. The entire concept of close air support as practiced today was pioneered by the Jabos over Normandy. Look at the modern doctrine of shock and awe. It is the P-47's philosophy scaled up to a global level, the application of such overwhelming and precise firepower that the enemy's will to resist is shattered before the ground battle truly begins. Every massive munitions expenditure, every technologically advanced weapon system designed to saturate a target area, every military budget that prioritizes logistical superiority and production capacity, all trace their lineage back to the moment the world realized what the P-47 truly was. When West Germany rebuilt its air force in the 1952 as a NATO ally, it did not resurrect the Focke-Wulf or the Messerschmitt. It adopted American aircraft, American tactics, and most importantly, the American philosophy. The student, having learned the harshest of lessons, now learned from the master, and so we return to the beginning, to that first kill over the French coast. The initial dismissal of the P-47 as a 7-ton milk bottle was the fatal miscalculation of an entire military culture. It was the failure to see that the rules of the game had been changed forever. The German pilot, in his elegant FW-190, was an artisan of war, a master of a deadly craft, but he was facing the emissary of a new age. The P-47 Thunderbolt did not just outgun the Focke-Wulf 190, it outproduced, outsupplied, outrepaired, and ultimately outthought the entire German aviation philosophy through the sheer undeniable logic of overwhelming industrial democracy. The 8 guns were not merely weapons, they were messengers. Every deafening burst was a telegram from the factories of Detroit, Long Island, and Missouri, a declaration of production capabilities that Nazi Germany, with its fractured, slave-driven war economy, could never hope to match. The thunderous, synchronized roar of those 8 Browning machine guns became something more than the sound of combat. It became the sound of inevitability. It was the sound of an old world of warfare dying, and a new, more terrible one being born. It was the sound of Allied victory, a roar that echoed from the heartland of a free nation to the skies over a dying tyranny, forever changing the face of the heavens. In the final analysis, the P-47 Thunderbolt stands as more than a legendary warplane. It is a monument to a paradigm shift in warfare. From its dismissed beginnings as a 7-ton beast, it proved that an industrial philosophy of overwhelming force could triumph over a doctrine of tactical artistry. Its 8 guns did not just shoot down enemy aircraft. They announced the arrival of a new era, where victory was forged in the factory as much as it was won in the sky. The Thunderbolt's legacy is etched in the very DNA of modern air power, a testament to the brutal logic that sustained technologically superior firepower is the ultimate arbiter of conflict. It was not merely a participant in the Second World War, it was an instructor teaching a harsh and enduring lesson. The Thunderbolt's story is a powerful example of a weapon that changed everything, but it is not the only one. History is filled with such game-changers. What other aircraft or weapon do you believe fundamentally rewrote the rules of engagement? Was it the agility of the Spitfire, the armor of the Tiger tank, or the strategic reach of the aircraft carrier? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's debate which machine truly had the greatest impact on history.